Now let's zoom out a little bit and look at our site at a bigger scale and the making of site plans. And, oh, come on. There are things to know about how a legal description is written and how surveyors' units are done and so on and so forth. We do talk about that in another class called Architectural Plans, which happens in the spring. So I think I will just refer you to PowerPoints in that class. Let's think about sheet numbering, though, and CAD layers. As you probably recall, among the sheet designators are C for civil and L for landscape. And as I might have mentioned, those are sometimes used interchangeably and sometimes not. So the basic idea is civil would have more to do with roads, streets, utilities. Landscape would have more to do with site grading, site preparation, vegetation, irrigation. Although, as I say, that can vary. So when we're naming our layers, when we're doing a civil drawing, we'll say C for civil. If you have a big project and you want a slightly bigger set of layer names, you can add these extra designators. So you could do CD for demo and so forth. Here are some of the major groups. If you work for OBEC doing bridge design, you will do a lot of drawings on this layer, C bridge. If you work for Olson Engineers, you will do a lot of layers on lines on these, the sewer layers, and so forth. Then here's the L for landscape designator. And you have extra designators available to you if you're on a big project. For example, you could have landscape demo, a separate designator for irrigation and for planting plans. Here are the major groups. Now, units of measure. You will encounter two different systems, engineering and architectural. And if you're on a big site, thinking about the overall site plan and where the utilities go, you are probably going to be using engineering units. And those units are in multiples of 10. So you might have 1 to 100, or 1 inch equals 10 feet, or those kinds of numbers. In some cases, you are using architectural scales. So you might have 1/8 of an inch equals a foot, which is the same thing as 1 to 96. Or you might have 1/4 of an inch to the foot, which is the same thing as 1 to 48, and so forth. Now let's just zoom through types of site plans. This is one of those situations where I've given you a lot of information for your reference in case you need to come back to it later when you're at work. I don't want to belabor these points too much. So civil plans will contain these kinds of things. A civil plan is drawn by an engineering firm, a civil engineering firm, or a drafter working for a civil engineering firm. And they have sections and profiles and layouts of road curves and so forth that are particular to that profession. You will also do a lot of drawing of utilities and that sort of thing. Here's a site demo, which is common. I want to call your attention to items to remain undisturbed and to be protected. I'm going to come back to that point in just a second. Many site plans have a large and general location plan that just says, in general, here's where this thing starts. Here's where the contractor access point is. There might be some kind of shaded in block that says park construction machinery here, store materials here, that sort of thing. We're going to talk about grading plans next time, so I won't go into a bunch of detail here, except to say that in a grading plan, the shape of the ground is indicated by squiggly lines, lines of equal elevation, topographic lines. And existing contours are shown with dashed lines. And then when you draw new contours, you use solid lines. And that's telling the excavation contractor where to come in and push dirt around. Here's an example. You might have a separate, so back to site plans, you might have a separate plan that's just for paving, for the paving contractor. And that might include not only a bunch of details about paving, but where the control joints and expansion joints and contraction joints are. We mentioned utility plans earlier. This tends to be done by a civil engineering firm. Here's an example. And then landscape plans, if you have a sheet starting with an L, at the least you'll probably have these, something about the site preparation and probably grading and topography. You could have irrigation plans, you could have planting plans. You need to show where the buildings are, the existing buildings and the proposed buildings, various site structures like where's the sidewalk and the light poles and so forth. And here's the point I wanted to emphasize, protection plans. In a site plan, it is really important to have a soil protection plan and a tree protection plan. And I didn't want to take the time to go off on a tangent and show you what's in those, but I will just say that basic idea is if you drive heavy equipment over some soil, the soil will be compacted and you'll never be able to, you won't get it back again. You can do some restoration work, but it will never be the same. And if there are tree roots there and you compact the soil, you can wind up killing the tree over the next 2 or 3 years. So these protection plans show where to put fencing, that orange construction fencing, that keeps people from parking in there or storing supplies in there. And then there'll be an actual plan that details quite specifically what to do, how to do the protection. So I just want you to be aware that that's a thing. The irrigation plans are for a particular kind of contractor, the irrigation contractor. And when you get to the final product, you'll have a plan that just shows them what size of pipe and what size and style of sprinkler heads. But a lot of planning will have gone into that. Here's a plan from an old Rainbird irrigation manual. I like them. Planting plans have symbols representing different types of plans, and there are different ways to do the symbols, from just plain circles to sort of branchy things representing tree branches to several other sorts of squiggles. But you'll pick some kind of symbol, and then there'll be a planting list that lists what type of plant does each one of these represent, what is its botanical name, what quantity do you need, and what size are you going to order. So you could buy a little tiny seedling, or you could buy a great big tree that had already grown in the nursery for several years. So you got to specify all that. And then here's another example of a planting plan. You see a range of simplicity and complexity. Different people do it different ways. But what you do need to look for is this organized plant list. Okay, so there's a whirlwind tour through site plans.